My phone buzzed against my apron like a trapped insect, and I already knew it was bad news. Daycare never texted this late unless Noah's fever had climbed again. Outside the kitchen doors, Aurora Prime glittered with winter money, all crystal light and soft jazz, while I counted tip dollars in my head and prayed my card wouldn't decline at the pharmacy. Marcus, my floor manager, brushed past me with that look that meant I was replaceable. Another double. Another smile. Another night pretending my bones didn't ache. I wiped my hands, swallowed panic, and stepped into the dining room. In here, the air smelled of truffle oil and expensive perfume, the kind that clung to velvet and never learned the word no. Guests laughed too softly, as if loud joy was for other zip codes. My uniform made me a shadow, black and white and easy to ignore, and that was the only reason I lasted. If people didn't see you, they didn't blame you. Still, I felt eyes on my back every time I passed the private hallway, the one we called the vault. Power liked privacy. Tonight, Marcus assigned me there, like he was tossing a coin again. He didn't say it kindly. He didn't have to. I saw the warning in his mouth, the silent threat of fewer shifts, late schedules. No mercy for a single mom who needed every hour. My fingers tightened around a silver tray of champagne flutes, each glass thin as a promise. I moved toward the velvet curtain and tried to steady my breathing. Behind it, the music dulled, the room narrowed, and the marble under my heels felt slicker. I told myself to be invisible. Invisible girls went home. If I could finish this table, I could buy Noah's medicine tomorrow. The vault wasn't louder. It was quieter, heavy with the kind of silence that came from being obeyed. 3 men sat at a round table. 2 looked like walls, broad shoulders, watchful hands, eyes that scanned before they blinked. The 3rd sat with his back to the wall, suit dark as charcoal, posture loose in a way that felt calculated. When I stepped in, his gaze found me like a lock finding its key. Not curious, not polite, focused, as if I mattered. I poured anyway, hands steady by practice while my heart sprinted because predators recognize when you hesitate. I shifted to refill the first flute, and my heel snagged the edge of the carpet. For one suspended second, the tray tipped, glass chiming like a warning bell. My stomach dropped. My mind flashed to Noah's face, to rent due, to the way one mistake could erase us. Then a hand closed around my waist, firm and precise, pulling me upright before the spill became a disaster. The tray steadied. The air changed. I was too close to him now, caught in his orbit, breathing his expensive, smoky cologne. Heat seeped through my uniform, and I hated noticing it. I tried to shrink back, already gathering apologies like coins, but he didn't look annoyed. If anything, he looked amused, almost satisfied, as if my stumble proved something. His hand left my waist slowly, not lingering, yet not rushing either. He said something soft, accented, the kind of tone that made people listen without realizing they were listening. The 2 men beside him shifted, alert, and the silence thickened again. My cheeks burned. I reached for the bottle, for my job, for my script, for safety. Then he angled a chair toward me, as if it had always been mine. Across the room, beyond the curtain, I caught a glimpse of Marcus hovering, ready to swoop in with discipline. I expected the familiar sting of embarrassment, the quick lecture, the reminder that mothers like me should be grateful for crumbs. Instead, the man in front of me lifted his hand in a small, effortless gesture, and Marcus froze as if someone had tightened a leash. No shouting, no threats I could hear. Just an invisible command that traveled through the air and landed on everyone's spine. The power in that quiet made my throat close. I forgot how to breathe. My phone buzzed again, bright against the dim gold of the vault, and terror prickled under my ribs. I imagined Noah on a cot, cheeks hot, waiting for me to show up like I always did. I was supposed to be a ghost, not a spectacle, and I was supposed to pour and vanish. I looked down at the chair, at the curve of his wrist resting on the table, at the calm patience in his posture. Why did he want me seated beside him? What did he see when he looked at me? Life felt like glass, about to break. He didn't ask permission. He simply made space for me in a world that wasn't meant to include women like Mia Thompson. One of his men reached for the bottle before I could, taking over my task with practiced ease, like it was decided. The man at the wall watched my face as if reading a file he already knew by heart. The chair waited, angled perfectly. The rest of the vault waited too, holding its breath. And I understood, with a chill that had nothing to do with Chicago winter, that my invisibility had just ended. He wanted more. The chair waited beside him like it had always belonged to me. My knees still shook from the near fall, and heat crawled up my neck, the kind that comes with shame and adrenaline. I could feel the other two men tracking every breath I took, not with curiosity, but with assessment. The whole vault held a careful stillness, like a museum after closing, except the exhibits had pulse points and weapons hidden under tailored cloth. I wanted to vanish back through the velvet curtain, but his calm attention pinned me in place. And somewhere outside, my phone kept buzzing. My hands fluttered toward the tray as if I could rewind time by regripping silver. I started to form an apology, the reflex I used on customers, managers, and life itself. Before any sound left my mouth, he made a small motion with his fingers toward the seat. It was not an invitation. It was the same kind of gesture traffic lights used, simple and absolute. I sat because my body understood authority faster than my pride did. The moment I lowered myself, the men beside him relaxed by a fraction, like a lock clicking. Marcus would notice. I'd pay. A server I had never seen slid in with a plate that belonged to the dining room, not the staff hallway. Creamy pasta, grilled chicken, vegetables arranged like art. The smell hit me, and my stomach answered with a humiliating growl. I tried to ignore it, the way I ignored hunger most days, telling myself no one needed groceries more than I needed dinner. He watched my face, not the plate, and I felt exposed, as if he could see every skipped meal and every late bill. When he nudged the plate closer, my fork moved before my thoughts caught up. My phone vibrated again, and the screen lit in my lap like a flare. For half a second it showed Noah's picture, his cheeks rosy from the cold, before the daycare message stacked on top. Fever still high. Pickup plan? My throat tightened so fast it hurt. I flipped the phone face down, pretending it was nothing, but his gaze dropped anyway. The shift in his eyes was subtle, not softer exactly, more precise, like he had found the real wound under the uniform. He did not ask questions. He simply looked at me as if he already knew the answer. I ate because refusing would have been another kind of scene, and I could not afford scenes. Each bite was warm, and with every swallow I hated how good it felt to be taken care of. He kept his voice low, speaking to the men with him in short phrases I could not understand, but their movements answered. One rose and slipped out through the curtain. The other set my tray aside like it was an item settled. I realized he was rearranging my night the way I rearranged Noah's bedtime when he was sick, fast, and without debate tonight. Relief should have washed over me, but it came braided with anger. I did not want a stranger solving my life like a puzzle, because puzzles belong to people with spare time. I lived in schedules, pickup windows, rent dates, and every disruption had consequences. My chest tightened as I pictured Marcus writing me up for sitting with guests. Then he appeared, hovering near the curtain, eyes wide and calculating. The instant he saw the man beside me, his posture collapsed into courtesy. His smile turned thin and obedient, like he had swallowed his pride and learned a new language. I watched the exchange like a person watching weather turn. There were no raised voices, no performance. The man beside me barely moved, yet Marcus nodded too quickly and backed away, as if he had been given an order he could not refuse. A phone appeared in the man's hand, sleek and black, and his thumb tapped once, twice, the way people confirmed a reservation. Marcus's own phone buzzed a second later. He glanced at the screen, went pale, and retreated through the curtain without meeting my eyes. My shift, I understood, had just been rewritten. Possibly my entire month. Panic hit hard and practical. No shift meant no tips, and no tips meant rent sliding past due. It meant choosing Noah's fever medicine over groceries again. It meant daycare warnings about late pickups, the kind that end with your spot quietly given away. My mind jumped further, to the fragile story of custody and stability, to how one bad month can look like neglect on paper. I started to stand, ready to sprint back to my apron, but the air around him felt arranged. He rose, and the room rose with him, like gravity had changed its mind entirely. I did not know his name, but I knew the weight of his decision. He turned toward the exit, not rushing me, simply assuming I would follow. That assumption scared me because it fit too well. The men flanked us with practiced ease. Beyond the curtain, staff eyes followed, sensing the hierarchy tilt. My phone burned in my pocket, Noah's fever waiting on my next move. I took one step, then another, pulled by safety and pushed by panic. In the hallway, a door clicked shut behind us, soft as a kiss, final as a lock. I had not agreed, and everyone in Aurora Prime kept pretending they hadn't watched me leave with him, but I felt every stare anyway as we crossed the dining room. The clink of silverware stuttered, and even the jazz seemed to lower its voice. Marcus stood near the host stand like a man holding his breath. I didn't look at him. If I looked, I might have begged for my shift back, and begging never paid rent. Adrian moved with that quiet certainty that made space around him. I walked beside him because my feet obeyed faster than my brain. Outside, the first hit of Chicago winter air felt like a slap. The street was loud again, full of horns and laughter, and the ordinary chaos of people who didn't know my life had just tilted. A black SUV waited at the curb, glossy and patient, as if it had been there all night. One of the men opened the rear door for me. The gesture was polite, but it didn't feel optional. I stepped in, and the leather swallowed me whole. The door closed with a soft, final thud that sounded too much like a lock. The outside noise vanished behind tinted glass. The cabin smelled of clean leather and expensive cologne, but underneath it I caught something sharper, like metal and vigilance. The front seat was occupied by a driver I hadn't met, shoulders squared, eyes flicking to mirrors the way my own eyes flicked to Noah when he slept too quietly. Adrian sat beside me without crowding, yet his presence filled every inch of space. He didn't need to touch me to make it clear I wasn't going anywhere alone tonight. My phone vibrated again in my pocket. I didn't check it. I already knew it would be daycare, and I couldn't fix Noah's fever from inside a stranger's car. My mind ran numbers anyway. Rent due in 4 days, the late fee after that, the daycare cutoff if I missed pickup too many times, the cost of fever medicine, the half tank of gas I couldn't afford. My shift should have lasted until midnight. It was barely 10 p.m., and the tips I needed were still on someone else's tables. At a stoplight, Adrian leaned forward and took my phone gently from my hand without asking. I flinched, hate flashing hot in my chest, but he didn't scroll through my life the way Caleb used to when he wanted proof of my attitude. Adrian simply tapped the screen, pulled up the map, and watched me with a question in his eyes that felt like a test. I gave him my address in a whisper of breath, and he entered it, then returned the phone to my palm like he was placing something valuable back where it belonged. We drove east, the skyline shrinking behind us as neighborhoods changed by the block. The streets grew darker, the storefronts smaller, the snow piled in gray ridges along the curb. I felt my shame rise the closer we got to my building. In the SUV, I smelled like money. Outside, my world smelled like exhaust and damp brick. I pictured Noah asleep under a thin blanket, and I hated that he might wake to a stranger in our hallway. Was this rescue or capture? The question kept circling, refusing to land. Part of me wanted to lean into safety I didn't earn, because safety had always been something I chased and never caught. Another part of me braced for the bill that would arrive later, stamped in invisible ink. Adrian's stillness beside me made the whole ride feel controlled, managed, like the city itself had been asked to move aside. That kind of power should have terrified me more than it did. When we turned onto my street, my heart kicked hard. The streetlight near the corner had been out for months. In its shadow, someone stood by the bodega window, hands in pockets, posture too familiar. For a second, my brain supplied Caleb's outline. The lazy tilt of his shoulders, the way he always looked like rules were for other people. I blinked, and the figure shifted, face hidden by a hood. Exhaustion, I told myself. Fear makes shapes out of nothing. Still, my skin didn't believe me. The SUV rolled to a stop in front of my building, peeling paint and a broken intercom that never got fixed. Adrian looked at it the way I looked at overdue bills, quiet disbelief mixed with irritation. One of the men stepped out first, scanning the sidewalk. Another opened my door. Our cold air rushed in, and I realized I had been holding my breath the entire ride. As I slid out, a heavy business card pressed into my hand. It was thick, embossed with only a number and the words "emergency line." The man who handed it didn't smile. His eyes said this was not a favor. It was procedure. He gestured at my phone, and I understood the instruction without hearing it. I was expected to confirm when I was inside. I climbed the stairs too fast, keys shaking, ears tuned for footsteps behind me. My apartment smelled like laundry soap and old heat, familiar and flimsy. I locked the deadbolt, then set the chain, as if thin metal could protect Noah from whatever world I had just brushed against. Only then did I look at my phone. A new contact sat there already, labeled Adrian, and a message pulsed on the screen. I'm asking for one thing: confirmation that I was safe. My thumb hovered, and my chest tightened at the expectation. I typed back with trembling fingers. The reply came instantly, warm and possessive. I leaned my forehead against the door and listened to the building creak. Tomorrow, I knew, would not belong to the Mia who had walked into Aurora Prime invisible. I woke before dawn to Noah's small cough and the familiar heat of his forehead under my palm. The apartment radiator clanked like it was arguing with the winter, and my body felt heavy from a night without real sleep. I checked the thermometer, watched the numbers climb, and tried not to picture daycare rules, missed work, and the thin line between stable and struggling. On the counter, my wallet lay open like a confession. A few wrinkled bills, loose coins, and a receipt for rent I still owed. I whispered that we would get through today, somehow, again together. At 7 in the morning, my phone lit up with a new message from Adrian, neat and certain, telling me breakfast would arrive at 7:30 and that Noah needed to eat with me. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred, half furious at the audacity, half relieved someone else had noticed I was running on fumes. Was this kindness or ownership? I typed a protest, deleted it, then set the phone down like it might burn me. Noah dozed on the couch, cheeks flushed, while I counted the minutes and listened for footsteps in the hall outside. Right on schedule, a knock came, polite but firm, and a delivery driver stood there holding bags from a bakery I only ever walked past. The smell hit me first. Butter, warm sugar, our coffee strong enough to wake the dead. I signed with shaking hands and carried everything inside like contraband. Croissants still steaming. Strawberries that looked too perfect to be real. Yogurt, honey, orange juice, and a little card with my name on it. My throat tightened at the idea that he knew my address, my routine, my hunger, and my son's fever. I felt seen and panicked quietly. Noah woke to the scent and blinked at the spread like Christmas had landed on our wobbly table. His eyes widened, then he smiled, the kind of smile that makes a tired mother forget her own fear for a second. He tore open a croissant and giggled when flakes fell onto his pajamas. I laughed too, softer than I meant to, then caught myself and looked at the locked door. What does a gift like this cost later? I poured juice, pretended this was normal, and fed him medicine between bites, counting his swallows like prayers for our fragile life. After breakfast, my phone buzzed again, and the message carried the same calm certainty as last night. A car was outside. The driver's name was Marco. He would take me where I needed to go, and I was not to argue with him or look at price tags. I wanted to throw the phone across the room. I also wanted to cry from relief because Noah's winter coat barely closed and his shoes pinched his toes. I tucked the emergency card into my wallet, kissed Noah's head, and told myself I was doing this for him, even scared of it. Marco waited by a black sedan like a man hired to be invisible. He opened the rear door, and I slid in with Noah bundled beside me, clutching his little dinosaur. The city looked different from this angle. Cleaner, faster, as if poverty was something you could drive past without seeing. Marco drove with quiet precision, never glancing too long at any mirror, and I felt the same sealed feeling as the SUV, only smaller. Protocol, not romance. My phone stayed warm in my hand, and I kept checking Noah's breathing, measuring safety in tiny, ordinary signs all the way. The boutique windows displayed dresses like art, but my focus stayed on Noah. A saleswoman treated me like a guest, and that alone made my throat tighten. I chose a thick coat, gloves, socks, and a backpack sturdy enough for kindergarten. I reached for children's fever syrup, then hesitated, ashamed of needing it in a place that smelled like perfume and money. Marco waited near the door, watchful, while staff brought sizes without asking questions. Then they guided me toward a fitting room for me. My pulse jumped. I had not come to feel pretty. I had come to survive. The dress they handed me was midnight blue, modest, expensive in the quiet way. In the mirror, I looked like someone who slept and ate and did not flinch at bills. Then I saw the tag. $3,000 for fabric that felt like air. The heels were $800, and my throat closed. Debt is a leash, and I have feared leashes my whole life. I tried to reach for something cheaper, but the room moved around me like my choice did not matter. My hands shook as I snapped a photo anyway, because the day had trained me to obey again. Adrian responded instantly. The quickness made me dizzy. His message was brief, approving, and it carried a warmth I did not know what to do with. I sent a picture of Noah's new coat, trying to anchor this in motherhood, not romance. Marco loaded the bags, and we drove home with my thoughts tangled in gratitude and fear. Was I being cared for or claimed? By late afternoon, my phone buzzed again, reminding me about dinner. I stared at the screen and understood this was not a one-time rescue. It was a schedule, and I was already inside it. By 7 p.m., Noah was finally asleep on the couch, flushed but calmer after the medicine. I changed in the tiny bathroom, smoothing the blue dress I still could not believe sat in my closet. The fabric felt like borrowed confidence. My mind kept returning to the same rule. Noah first, always. A neighbor agreed to listen for him, and I hated how that sounded like I was handing my heart to a stranger. When the black sedan pulled up, my stomach tightened. I told myself this was one dinner, not a life, and I would come home by midnight. Our Marco drove without chatter, and the city lights slid across the windows like water. Adrian was already in the back seat when I opened the door, his stillness making the leather feel smaller. He did not greet me the way men usually did. He simply looked, as if checking that I had arrived intact. I sat with my hands folded, holding my purse like a shield. The route climbed toward the lake, then into a tower where the lobby smelled of marble and money. A private elevator carried us up. Each floor felt like another question. I had no answers. The doors opened into a quiet apartment that looked more like a night sky than a home. All dark wood and glass and soft light. Candles waited on a table set for two. Food steamed in covered dishes, and music drifted from hidden speakers. No servers moved in the background, no audience watched, and that absence made me breathe easier and harder at the same time. I noticed security without seeing it. A second door, a camera lens, the faint pause before the elevator closed behind us. Privacy here was not romance. It was control. I felt it in bones. He guided me to the chair, then served the first course himself, careful and unhurried, like this moment mattered. I kept waiting for the price, the favor, the demand. Instead, he watched me eat, and my throat loosened enough for truth to slip out. I told him about loneliness that did not care whether I was surrounded by people. I admitted how invisible I felt, even when I was loud for Noah. I confessed the shame of being judged, the fear that one sick day could cost my job and my child's stability. Saying it made me tremble inwardly, quietly. Adrian did not interrupt. He leaned forward, palms open on the table, as if offering room instead of taking it. He set a glass of water closer when my hands shook. He waited when my voice faltered, and the waiting felt like respect. When I mentioned Noah by name, I watched his face for judgment, for annoyance, for that familiar look men give when a woman comes with responsibility. His expression tightened, not with disgust, but with focus. He nodded once like he was filing Noah into the center of the story. That frightened me, and it comforted me. After dinner, he guided me toward the windows, and the city glittered below like spilled jewelry. On a low shelf sat a small plastic dinosaur, the same kind Noah loved. Next to it waited a child-sized cup and a soft blanket folded with careful corners. My stomach turned. Coincidence felt impossible in a place this controlled. I remembered my phone screen flashing Noah's fever message, and I realized Adrian had noticed more than my hunger. He had noticed my son. The thought warmed me, then scared me. Preparation can be care, or it can be possession in this city. His attention returned to my face, steady and patient, and I felt the test sharpen. Would I step closer, or retreat to the smallness I knew? I thought of Noah asleep and weighed risk. Adrian lifted his hand and paused, giving me room to refuse. I did not. I leaned in, choosing this with my eyes open. The kiss landed, more question than claim, and my body startled at the tenderness. Warmth spread through my chest, like a light switching on in a room I had kept dark. For a breath, I forgot bills, fever, and fear, and felt alive. We broke apart, and the quiet felt electric. My lips tingled, and I hated how fast my body reached for comfort in a life that rarely offered it. I repeated my rule. Noah first, always. No man earned access to him through gifts. Adrian seemed to sense that boundary. He stepped back, giving me air, giving me the right to slow down. That restraint steadied me more than the candles or skyline. Still, my mind chased the meaning of the kiss. Was it tenderness or ownership? I did not know. The not knowing sat in my chest like a stone. His phone buzzed once, then again, each vibration pulling him farther from me. The first time he ignored it. The second time his jaw set. The third time he checked the screen, and the warmth in his face vanished. His shoulders squared, attention narrowing, the quiet in the room turning sharp. A moment ago he was careful, almost gentle. Now he looked like the man people feared in the vault. The contrast chilled me. I realized I had kissed a protector, But I was sitting beside a predator, and whatever waited behind that call was about to arrive. The phone buzzed again, and the candlelight seemed to flinch. A second ago, Adrian's hands had been careful, his gaze warm, my lips still humming with disbelief. Now his eyes went distant, like shutters closing on a window. He read the screen, then lifted his head and scanned the room as if measuring exits I hadn't noticed. The music kept playing, but the air turned sharp. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to remember how to breathe, trying to decide whether I was safe or simply contained. I should have asked to leave. I should have thought about Noah sleeping under my neighbor's watch and the way fever can spike without warning. Instead, I stood there, rooted by the same gravity that had pulled me into the vault. Adrian motioned for me to follow. He didn't touch me, but the space he created guided me anyway. We crossed the dark hallway, past artwork I couldn't name, to a door I'd assumed was a closet. A small panel lit up when he pressed his thumb to it. The door released with a soft hiss, and I stepped into a room that stole the warmth from my skin. Screens covered one wall, each showing a different camera angle. The building lobby, the garage, the elevator bank, a street corner outside. A map of Chicago spanned a corkboard, marked with colored pins and handwritten notes. A desk sat in the center, cluttered with folders, phones, and a laptop that looked like it belonged to a military briefing, not a man who had just kissed me. My stomach rolled. This wasn't a hobby. It was infrastructure. There were printed schedules, lists of names, photographs taken from across streets, and diagrams that made my eyes sting from trying to understand them. It felt like stepping behind the curtain of a stage and finding the machinery that moves the world. Adrian stood beside me, silent, letting me see it without softening the edges. In that silence, I understood the truth my instincts had been whispering since the vault. He ran things that didn't belong in daylight. Then I saw it. A folder on the desk, tabbed in black, stamped with my last name in clean block letters, Thompson. My breath caught so hard it hurt. On top was a photo of Noah outside his daycare gate, and backpack too big for his shoulders, cheeks red from cold. The angle was wrong, taken from across the street, the kind of picture you get when someone is watching without being seen. Rage surged up so fast it blurred my vision. I wasn't just frightened, I was violated. I turned on him, shaking, and he didn't flinch. He didn't reach for excuses or romance. His face held the same ruthless honesty he'd shown with my manager, as if pretending would insult us both. I could tell he'd gathered information the way soldiers check a perimeter. Not to own me, but to measure what could hurt me. That distinction should have calmed me. It didn't. Because the file proved he could reach into my life whenever he wanted, and because someone in his world had already forced him to look at my son as a risk. I needed rules that didn't shift with his mood. I needed to know, not guess, because guessing gets mothers blindsided. In my head, I demanded that if he kept me close, he would stop hiding truths behind protection. I could live with scary facts. I couldn't live with surprises. He answered in the only language he seemed to trust: consequences. He made it clear that in an emergency, hesitation would be the enemy, and that Noah would pay for a single second of doubt. I hated how reasonable it sounded. I hated more that I understood it. For Noah, I agreed to one thing. When danger came, I would move first and argue later. Another buzz cut through the room, and Adrian's focus snapped back to the screen in his hand. Whatever it said made his muscles go tight, controlled anger packed behind his ribs. He looked at me once, long enough that I felt the weight of a decision, and then he moved with sudden efficiency. He asked me, with a look that didn't allow refusal, to stay in the penthouse where the doors were reinforced and the cameras watched. He summoned someone with a brief call, and within minutes the elevator chimed. A man stepped in wearing a plain suit, eyes alert, posture disciplined. Grant Hale, head of security. He took in the command center, then me, like he was noting assets and vulnerabilities in the same glance. Adrian spoke to Grant in a tone that shrank the room, then he returned to me. His hand hovered near my shoulder, stopping short, as if he remembered I needed choice. The gentleness lasted a second, swallowed by urgency. He left without ceremony, the hidden doors sealing behind him, and I realized I was watching a man walk back into war because someone had forced his hand. Grant stayed. He guided me out of the command center into the living room, positioning himself where he could see every entrance. His expression was calm, and that steadiness scared me more than anger. In words like warnings, he made the truth unavoidable. The moment Adrian chose me, he gave his enemies a lever. They would pull it. After the hidden door sealed behind Adrian, the penthouse stopped feeling like a skyline fantasy and started feeling like a shelter built for storms. The candles were still lit, but their warmth couldn't reach me. I kept seeing Noah's photo on that folder, the angle of it, the proof that my child had been watched from across the street. Grant Hale stayed a few steps away, quiet and solid, positioned where he could see the elevator and the hall in the same glance. His calm should have soothed me. Instead, it made everything real, because calm like that only exists when danger is expected. Grant didn't lecture me. He laid out patterns, and I absorbed them the way I memorized daycare policies and pediatric dosing charts. In his world, you never walked out a door alone, just because the hallway looked empty. You kept your phone charged because the first call mattered more than pride. If something felt wrong, you treated that feeling like a fire alarm, not a suggestion. And when someone trained for this told you to move, you moved first and asked why later. I hated how much it sounded like motherhood, except the stakes here weren't scraped knees. They were names and leverage. I tried to hold on to anger, because anger is easier than fear. I told myself I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be in a stranger's penthouse while my son slept blocks away under someone else's supervision. Then I noticed the layers, a keypad by the elevator, a second lock on the balcony door, and a small ceiling lens that blinked once and went dark again. This place was designed to keep people out, and to keep someone in if needed. The cage wasn't bars. It was planning. Grant offered water, and I drank because my mouth had turned to sand. I forced my breathing to slow and pictured Noah's fevered face until the panic steadied into focus. Every time my phone lit up, Grant's eyes tracked it like a weather report. He wasn't judging. He was measuring risk, the way I measured Noah's temperature. The next buzz didn't come from Adrian. The number was unknown, and my stomach dropped before I even opened it. A photo filled the screen. Noah stood outside his daycare gate, bundled in his old coat, head tilted the way he did when he listened hard. Behind him, the street looked ordinary. Cars parked at angles, a tree wrapped in winter lights. That ordinariness was the worst part. Beneath the photo was a short line of text that made my vision narrow. It didn't demand money. It simply implied that someone could get closer. My fear sharpened into something clean. I stopped being the woman in a borrowed dress and became a mother with a mission. I ran through routines like a checklist. Who had Noah's pickup code? Who was on the authorized list? Who knew my schedule? Who knew I was here? Adrian knew because he had a file. Grant knew because he was standing in front of me. My neighbor knew because I begged. And then there was the shadow from my street last night. The posture that had pulled an old name out of my memory. Caleb. Noah's father. The man who disappeared when responsibilities stopped being romantic. I didn't collapse. I didn't scream. I felt my spine straighten. I told Grant, with a steadiness that surprised even me, that we were going to get my son right now. Waiting for Adrian to return was a luxury I didn't have. Noah's safety was not a discussion, and if this world demanded obedience, then it could start by obeying a mother. Grant studied my face for one beat, as if deciding whether I was hysterical or strategic. Then his posture shifted. The calm stayed, but it turned operational. He keyed in an elevator code I hadn't known existed, tapped out updates, and listened through an earpiece. I didn't get details, but I could tell he was moving resources toward a place where children ate crackers and napped on mats. I pulled up Noah's daycare contact, ready to warn them, then stopped. If someone was already watching, a sudden call might make them act faster. The message refreshed. Another photo, wider, the same gate from a different angle, the text beneath it hinting at time running out. My pulse hammered in my ears. Grant saw my face change and nodded once, like he understood without words. He guided me toward the entryway, making sure I didn't leave in a way that got us followed. I grabbed my purse and the emergency card, and my mind rehearsed Noah's face the way actors rehearse lines before a stage. If I ran, I risked being chased. If I stayed, I risked being too late. Either way, motherhood meant choosing with no perfect answer. The elevator chimed before we stepped out. Grant's hand hovered near his jacket, not threatening, just ready. The doors opened and Adrian walked in like a man who'd taken a hard turn through darkness. His knuckles were scraped, a bruise blooming along one cheekbone, and his eyes were colder than the night outside. When he saw my phone in my hand and the terror I couldn't hide anymore, his gaze locked onto mine with a brutal question. Did I trust him enough to bring my son into his war? Adrian stepped out of the elevator like he'd been carved from the night, sleeve pushed up, knuckles scraped, a bruise blooming at his cheekbone. The penthouse lights didn't soften him. They only showed what he hadn't bothered to hide. Grant's posture tightened, then eased when Adrian gave a single nod. My phone was still open to Noah's photo, and I held it up without thinking, the way a mother holds up proof. Adrian's gaze flicked to the screen, then to me, and I felt relief collide with terror. His silence said we were late, and someone was already watching us. In my head, I counted what mattered. Noah at Mrs. Delaney's apartment 3 floors above mine, the spare key under the planter, the daycare pickup list with only my name, the fever medicine timed for the next dose. I also counted what could break us: a missed rent payment, a report to child services, an ex who decided fatherhood was a weapon. Grant explained the move in clipped, careful steps I translated into one rule. We bring Noah into a safer circle before anyone can touch him. I nodded, not surrendering, choosing strategy. My throat burned, but hands stayed steady. The sedan slid into the garage and out into the city like a shadow with a purpose. I sat between Grant and Adrian, Noah's small backpack on my lap as if weight could keep me grounded. Streetlights painted the windows in quick stripes. Every car behind us looked suspicious until it passed. Every red light felt like a hand on my shoulder, slowing me when I needed speed. Adrian's focus was split, eyes on mirrors, phone in his palm, jaw tight. Yet when my breathing hitched, he angled his body slightly toward me, shielding without touching like an unspoken promise. We stopped outside my building, and shame hit me harder than cold. The lobby light flickered, the stairwell smelled of damp wool, and I hated bringing danger into a place that barely held my life together. Grant went first, scanning, then Adrian followed, moving quietly. I'm too big for the narrow steps. I knocked on Mrs. Delaney's door and forced my voice to stay calm. She opened it, startled by the suits, and I scooped Noah up before he could wake fully. His skin was warm, his breath sweet with sleep, and my heart unclenched. Adrian watched, as if learning reverence. Outside, Noah blinked awake against my shoulder and noticed Adrian before he noticed fear. His eyes tracked the bruise, then the black car, then my face, searching for my cue. I gave him a soft smile and a kiss to his hair, begging him silently to trust me. Adrian crouched to Noah's level, hands open, posture controlled like he was approaching something fragile. Noah's fingers brushed Adrian's sleeve, curious about the fabric, and he made a small sound of wonder. Adrian didn't flinch. He offered the dinosaur toy from his pocket, and not as a trick, as a bridge for him. In the car, Noah settled between us, clutching the toy like it had always been his. I kept waiting for Adrian to claim space, to insist, to use my son as proof of control, but he didn't. He kept his hands, voice low, eyes on Noah with patience. When Noah's head tipped toward his shoulder, Adrian went still, like the weight meant more than it should. I saw something crack behind the power, a memory of being small and unheld. He didn't smile, yet his face softened. For a moment I believed he could be safe, and it scared me. My phone buzzed again and the number looked wrong, familiar in a way my body remembered. Another image arrived, not Noah this time, but the corner of the bodega on my street, the same shadowed spot where I'd thought I saw a man last night. In the reflection of the window, a ring caught light, a detail that made my stomach flip. Caleb used to wear a ring like that, pretending it made him important. Grant leaned in, eyes narrowing, and I watched his attention snag on the metadata and the angle, like he'd found a fingerprint without touching anything. The name I hadn't said in years rose behind my teeth like acid. Caleb wasn't a ghost. He was a door, one I'd left unlocked by hope and paperwork. He knew Noah's birthday, his daycare, my route home, the way I moved. If he was selling glimpses of my son, he wasn't doing it out of love. He was trading leverage. Adrian's jaw tightened when Grant showed him the screen, and I saw the equation form in his eyes. Enemies would rather pull a father's string than fight a boss head-on. My anger sharpened into certainty right then, finally. Adrian touched my shoulder lightly, a rare restraint, and I read it as a promise to keep my boundaries intact. Then his phone rang again, and the warmth vanished. Grant's earpiece crackled, and the words I couldn't hear made both men move at once. Papers and pins in the command center mattered more than dinner and candles. I held Noah closer, feeling his weight, and understood the battlefield had expanded. Caleb's betrayal was only one thread, and someone else was pulling harder. Adrian's eyes met mine with a warning. The next move wouldn't be quiet, and the clock was running. Noah finally fell asleep in the spare room of the penthouse, his small chest rising with the stubborn rhythm of a kid who refuses to stop breathing just because adults are scared. I sat beside him, thumb tracing the edge of his dinosaur. Now while my mind replayed the anonymous photos and the name I hadn't spoken in years. Adrian moved through the apartment like a storm contained in a suit, checking his phone, tightening plans, disappearing into quiet corners with Grant. Every time he passed Noah's door, his gaze paused, as if the child was both promise and liability tonight. Before noon, he decided we had to leave the city's centerline, not as a favor, but as a calculation. I hated the idea of being sent away while he faced whatever was coming. Yet Noah's fever and Caleb's shadow made my pride feel childish. Grant escorted us to a convoy outside a service garage, windows dark, engines already warm. The drive stretched past warehouses and frozen fields until a gated villa appeared, low and wide behind stone walls. Adrian Russo met us at the door, elegant, sharp-eyed, and wearing softness like armor. She took Noah's hand, then nodded at me. Inside, the house smelled of lemon and clean linens, nothing like Adrian's dark glass tower. Renee set a blanket over Noah as if she'd done it 1,000 times, then guided me to the kitchen where soup simmered and security cameras blinked quietly in corners. She didn't ask for my story. She watched my hands, the way they shook when my phone buzzed. Her presence felt like family muscle, but also like a woman who understood hunger. In her world, loving a man like Adrian meant accepting two truths. Tenderness existed, and danger never took days off. Not for anyone. Hours crawled. Noah napped, woke, sipped water, and asked for cartoons, so I gave him a screen and pretended this was a normal sick day. I checked my phone every few minutes anyway, counting like a metronome. Medicine at 3, another dose at 7, rent due on Friday. The question of who would protect us if Adrian didn't come back. Grant's texts arrived in clipped summaries I could feel more than read. The meeting with the Moretti syndicate was happening. It sounded like it was going well until the silence between updates turned heavy. I knew news never stayed alone. Near dusk, my phone rang, and the tone of Grant's message shifted from reporting to commanding. Someone had leaked the negotiation location, and pressure was moving. I didn't need details to understand the word rush. The house around me changed instantly. Renee's warmth snapped into steel. Guards repositioned. Doors closed. The villa that had felt like refuge became a staging point. Grant explained the concept in a single phrase that lodged in my bones. We needed a place that was clean. A place that could not be tied back to Adrian if things went wrong. The clock started then. We left with Noah bundled against me, his head heavy on my shoulder, unaware that adults had turned bedtime into relocation. Renee walked beside us, heels silent, turning family into formation. Cars waited in a line, and the windows swallowed the world the moment we climbed in. I watched the road through dark glass and kept my voice gentle when Noah stirred. Fear had nowhere to go, so it hardened into planning. Keep him calm. Keep him close. Keep my hands steady. Behind us, the villa gates shut, and I understood clean meant disappearing. My name felt like evidence now. In the dark ride, Grant shared fragments, and my mind stitched them into one picture. The Moretti syndicate might accept terms, yet the leak made every agreement pointless because someone wanted chaos. I thought of Caleb's ring, the angles, the way the photos arrived when my routines were exposed. Caleb knew which doors opened and which opened with fear. He could sell my location to rivals, then leak the same location to pressure, getting paid twice, claiming he was a father reaching for his son. The betrayal clarified when I remembered he never asked about Noah's health, only about access. Once I saw the pattern, I stopped asking why this was happening and started deciding what I would do. I kept Noah's head against my shoulder and hummed softly, the way I did during thunderstorms, while my mind built a list. New pickup codes, new routines, fewer windows. And Grant's phone kept lighting up with urgency that tasted like smoke. We were being rerouted to a second location, cleaner than the first, farther from names and paperwork. Adrian's message came through at last, short and final, and I felt its weight even without words. He was choosing us over his empire. The convoy turned onto a back road, and the city lights fell away behind us. Noah slept again, exhausted from fear he couldn't name, while I watched dark trees flash past and tried to imagine tomorrow. Renee's steadiness echoed in my head. Survival meant accepting help, even when help came wrapped in control. Ahead, a third vehicle waited, and Grant's face told me this was the real escape route, the one not tied to addresses or cameras. The night run had begun. Somewhere behind us, Adrian was wiping traces and building a plan, and I felt a door closing for good. By midnight, the city looked like a smear of neon behind tinted glass, and I could feel time chasing us harder than any car. The convoy moved in quiet choreography, black vehicles sliding through Chicago's side streets and service roads, always 2 turns ahead of whatever pressure was building behind us. Streetlights flickered across Noah's sleeping face, and each flash felt like a countdown. I kept my voice low and soft whenever he stirred, the way I used to during thunderstorms when our apartment windows rattled and he asked if the sky was angry. I brushed my thumb over his temple, checked his breathing, and hid the shake in my hands by holding him tighter. Fever made kids restless, but fear made mothers precise. Adrian sat beside me, silent and controlled, his attention split between mirrors, phone updates and the small body tucked against my chest. I could tell he wanted to reach for Noah, to reassure him, but he didn't. He kept his hands to himself the way a man keeps a weapon holstered until he has to use it. That restraint mattered to me more than any promise. We left the last clean strip of city light and turned onto a back road where snow lay untouched on fields, and the world smelled like pine and cold earth. A cottage appeared at the edge of the woods, small and practical. Nothing like Adrian's glass tower or the Villa Renee had guarded. Its safety came from invisibility, not glamour. The porch light blinked once, and my chest loosened with the first taste of relief. Grant moved through the place first, checking corners and doors with a quiet competence that didn't need explanation. Another guard stayed outside, on a shadow against the trees. I carried Noah inside, set him on the couch, and watched his lashes flutter as he sank back into sleep. The cottage was safer than my apartment, and lonelier than any place I had ever been. Sometime after 1 a.m, Grant's phone lit, and his shoulders eased. I didn't ask for details. The shift in the room told me enough. The immediate heat had cooled, at least for now. But for now was not a future, and I refused to raise my son in a life made of temporary. When Adrian finally stepped into the cottage, his face looked carved from exhaustion, the bruise still dark along his cheekbone. He glanced at Noah first, then at me, and I understood what he was asking without words. Trust. I gave him something harder than trust. I gave him a boundary. In my head, I laid it out clean. No more running forever. No more secrets that could blindside me. No cage dressed up as luxury. Noah needed a life with school mornings and grocery lists, not escape routes. Adrian listened the way he did in the penthouse, still and unreadable. But I saw the decision land behind his eyes. He had built power by never stepping back. Now he started planning a retreat that wasn't weakness. He would strip away the operations that drew attention, keep what could stand in daylight, and make his world smaller so our lives could be bigger. Love was turning into a plan. For a few minutes, the cottage felt almost normal. Noah shifted in his sleep, the dinosaur tucked under his arm. Adrian stood near the window, watching the trees as if they were enemies. I watched him instead. A man like him had learned war before tenderness, and yet, here he was, reshaping himself around a child who wasn't even his. The tenderness in that choice scared me, because it meant he could lose something. A faint crunch sounded outside, snow under a boot, too heavy for an animal. Adrian went still. Grant lifted a hand and moved toward the door, listening. My pulse spiked, but my body stayed quiet for Noah's sake. I had seen that posture before, the lazy confidence of a man who believes he can talk his way out of anything. My memory supplied Caleb before anyone else. Grant's phone vibrated, and his eyes narrowed at the screen. A camera feed from the tree line showed a figure near the fence, hands in pockets, head tilted like he was waiting to be invited. No weapon flashed, no threat screamed, but the confidence in his stance was its own kind of violence. Caleb's leverage was not a gun. It was a birth certificate, a last name, the claim that he could walk into Noah's life and call it love. I stared at the screen and felt dread bloom under my ribs. Rivals and pressure were storms Adrian could fight. Caleb was a door from my past that opened straight into my son's future. The new life we were planning felt real for the first time, and that was exactly why it could be taken. I kept my voice calm as I moved closer to Noah, and I knew the hardest fight ahead wouldn't be in the streets. It would be in courtrooms and doorways and the places where a father's rights can become a weapon. Behind the trees, Caleb waited, patient and calculating, and I realized the past hadn't just found us. It had found our front door. If he knocked, he would do it smiling, and I would have to decide what mercy costs my child. Our Caleb's silhouette stayed at the tree line, motionless, like he owned the darkness. Inside the cottage, Noah slept on the couch with his dinosaur under his chin, unaware that his name was being traded outside. My first instinct was to rush the door, to scream, to drag the past into the light and crush it. Instead, I remembered Grant's rules and my own. Fear makes you loud, and loud makes you easy to find. I pulled the curtain back 1 inch, watched the snow for prints, and forced my breathing slow. Noah's safety had to stay bigger than my anger. Grant didn't confront Caleb with threats. He treated him like a spill to contain. Adrian stayed behind me, a quiet wall, while Grant filmed the perimeter with his phone, capturing Caleb's face, his car plate, and the way he tried to stay just outside the property line. Caleb kept gesturing toward the house, as if fatherhood gave him a key. Grant called our lawyer contact and the county line at the same time, not to start drama, but to create a record. When Grant finally stepped onto the porch, he didn't negotiate. He redirected Caleb into consequences he couldn't dodge. By sunrise, Caleb was gone, not because anyone chased him, but because the ground under him turned official. Grant emailed the video to a lawyer and to a case file number, and that alone changed the game. Within days, paperwork tightened around Caleb's access. Only scheduled contact through counsel, no surprise visits, no messages to daycare staff, no hovering near Noah's school. I didn't learn every legal phrase, and I didn't need to. I learned the feeling of boundaries that held. Caleb's favorite weapon had been uncertainty, and now uncertainty belonged to him, not to us. I let myself sleep again. I grieved the father Noah deserved, the one I invented during pregnancy when I still believed men could grow up on schedule. Caleb had not been a monster. He had been smaller than responsibility, and that smallness had bruised us for years. Standing in the cottage kitchen, watching Noah sip water and smile at cartoons, I released the fantasy that Caleb would suddenly become safe. I didn't need his apology. I needed his distance. That release felt like tearing off an old bandage, sharp at first, then clean. The past could knock, but it didn't get invited in ever again. Adrian didn't celebrate the win. He treated it as a warning shot. He spent the next week restructuring like a man cutting wires before a fire spreads. Businesses that could stand in daylight moved to the front. Restaurants, import contracts, real estate. Anything that drew heat got sold, shut, or handed off. He stopped showing up in places that required secrecy to survive. The change wasn't dramatic. It was disciplined, and discipline is how men like him show love. He asked me to study, not to depend. For the first time, protection looked like stability. I could breathe, for once. Months later, our mornings became boring in the best way. Noah woke up warm, not scared, and his fever was a story we told, not a threat we lived. I made oatmeal, packed lunches, and walked him to school with Grant at a respectful distance that felt like a shadow fading. At night, I took online classes at the kitchen table, learning business terms and contracts so I could understand what Adrian was building. My Adrian came home earlier, shoulders lighter, hands cleaner, and he learned how to sit through cartoons without looking at his phone. Peace arrived in small repetitions. Renee visited often, bringing soup and blunt advice wrapped in affection. Noah started calling her Aunt Renee without being prompted, and she pretended not to melt every time he did. She taught me how to hold my head up in rooms that once would have swallowed me. Grant became less like a guard, and more like a gatekeeper who respected my choices, stepping in only when I asked. Adrian softened around them too, letting family happen in his space. One Sunday, I watched Noah hand Adrian a crayon, and Adrian used it, drawing on purpose just to make him laugh. Then Adrian drove me back to my old block, the one I used to speed through. The building where I'd lived had peeling paint and broken locks, and I felt my old shame rise before I could stop it. Adrian had bought it. Not to erase my past, but to honor it. Renovations started. Safe doors, clean hallways, affordable units, and a small childcare room on the first floor where parents could breathe. He funded job training nonprofits, and he insisted the rent stay reachable. Watching workers carry new windows upstairs, I realized power can be repurposed, not just feared. I wasn't being rescued anymore. I was rebuilding. I started speaking up at school meetings, asking questions I used to swallow. I kept a folder of documents, schedules, emergency numbers, and I knew exactly who was authorized to pick up my child. I worked part-time by choice, not desperation, and my tips became savings instead of survival. Adrian never asked me to be small. When my fear spiked, he didn't shame it. He helped me plan through it. The strangest part was realizing I could take up space without apologizing. I had a home, and it didn't require invisibility. On a quiet spring morning, I held a test and watched 2 lines appear, small and undeniable. I told Adrian later with Noah tucked between us, and I saw a man built for control go silent with hope. We didn't pretend life would be perfect. We promised to keep choosing stability, truth, and each other. If you've ever felt invisible, please remember visibility isn't worth. Worth was always there. The right people just learned to see it. If this story stayed with you, like, share, and comment the moment you stopped surviving and started living. I will read everyone.